All right, welcome back. This is part two of the chapter 5 video. So we had been talking about GDP, and the book talks a little bit about understanding business cycles. You may have a pretty good idea of this already, but basically the economy tends to naturally just kind of have these ups and downs. So terminology here is pretty easy. Peak is when you kind of hit, your GDP grows and it hits a peak. It's maxed out. It starts to dip a little bit. If GDP is going down, that's what's called a recession. When it hits the very bottom of that recession, that's a trough, and then the growth period is expansion. So pretty simple stuff there. Just understand that the business cycle is kind of this process of going up and down, but also understand that the long-term trend is really upward. So this is GDP growth throughout history, going all the way back to 1871. So you can see ups and downs in that cycle, but the general trend is upward. So that's a good thing. Here's another look at that, shorter time period, but same thing. The economy goes up and down, but the long-term general trend has been upward. Let's all hope that continues. So here, on to probably the more difficult stuff in this chapter. Price indexes are things that economists use, and these are government economists use to measure the average price level. So there are all sorts of products and things out there, but if you can imagine sort of an average price level, we want to estimate inflation by looking at that average price level and seeing if prices are going up over time and at what rate. So we do that using price indexes. There's several indexes that economists use. We'll talk about some of them, but the most common ones are the GDP deflator and the consumer price index. So inflation just means an increase in the average price level. About 1 to 3% annually is pretty normal. Deflation refers to a decrease in the average price level. It's pretty rare, but it does happen occasionally. So to compute a price index, economists pick a bunch of goods and services, which they call a market basket. And what goes into the market basket is basically the things that are most commonly purchased as far as goods and services. So they're looking out there and saying, what are people spending their money on? That's the stuff we're going to look at. Once you've established that market basket of goods and services, you track the prices of those in each year that you're interested in, add up the total cost of that market basket for each year, and then use the equation down at the bottom to compute the price index. So the price in whatever the current year is, whatever year you're interested in, divide that by the price in the base year. The base year is completely arbitrary. It's just kind of like your reference point. So they will get together and say, all right, we're going to make 2000 our base year. We're going to compare everything else to prices in 2000. So, if your current year is 2017 and the base year is 2000, most likely the prices are going to be higher in the current year. So you'll get a ratio of something like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, multiply by 100, and you'll get something like 120 or 130. So here's a simple example. You're going to do an exercise very, very similar to this one. Here is some made-up data on what I might have spent my money on in 2010. The cost of those same things in 2017, you can see the total was $1,230. It's risen to $1,555. So if we wanted to compute a price index, I'll call it Rob's price index, RPI. We wanted to compute a price index for these things for 2017 using 2010 as the base year. There's the math. You can follow it yourself. We come up with a number of 126.4. The interpretation here is what's important. So 126.4 means prices of the things that I bought have risen 26.4% since the base year. So that's how you interpret a price index. Here are the two most common, again, the GDP deflator, also sometimes called the implicit price deflator, and the consumer price index. So if you want to just start by looking at the GDP deflator here, you'll see the number 100 here for the year 2010. You see up here it says 2010 equals 100. That's telling you that that is the base year. So the price index will always be exactly 100 in the base year, because if you go back to the equation, the price of the market basket in the current year, if the current year is the base year, this ratio is going to be 1. 1 times 100 gives you 100. So if you're looking at a table like this, without even being told, you know that's the base year. A number like this at the bottom, 109, means prices are about 9% higher than they were in the base year. Number like this one up for 2077 means that prices were about 77% of what they were in the base year. Similarly, over here, the table for the consumer price index is a little weird. Numbers are much bigger. Right here where it says 1982 to 84 equals 100. That tells you that the base year for this price index is that 3-year period, 82 to 84. So they use like an average of prices for those 3 years. So when you see, for example, for 2006, a number like 201.6, that means prices have roughly doubled, a little more than doubled since, somewhere about 1983. Another thing you're going to have to do in the chapter exercises is compute real GDP. So we talked in the last video about how real GDP is inflation adjusted. Nominal GDP is not inflation adjusted. So this is the gross domestic product for the U.S. in actual billions of dollars in the prices of those years. But you can't really, the point is you can't really compare this number for 2000 with this number in 2015 and say, well, that represents economic growth, because two things have happened between 2000 and 2015. A, the economy has probably grown, but B, prices have also risen. So this number is much bigger due to both of those factors. So if we want to know how much the economy's actually grown, we have to compute real GDP. You do that using this equation. I'm not going to talk you through the math, but here's the quick version of the math for the year 2008. So if we take 2008's nominal GDP, 14,291, we find that the real GDP is 14,923.8. So that's inflation adjusted. That's putting prices in their 2010 price equivalent. All right, hopefully that helps. Another type of problem is this. What if we're not looking for real numbers? We don't really care about the base year. So here's an example. You'll have to do a couple like this in your exercises. Assume you know that the average smartphone costs $400 in the year 2000. Somebody asks you, what should that cost in 2010? What you can do is look at the percent change in the consumer price index between those 2 years. That gives you an average rate of inflation for things in general in the economy. So the equation is in your study guide, which is included in the checklist, should be in the book, but if you calculate the percent change in CPI between 2000 and 2010, you'll find that it is 26.6%. So prices on average have risen that much. So you can assume the phone should cost roughly 26% more. So 400 times 1.266 gives you 506.40. So that's an estimate of what something should cost based on the consumer price index. Just another way of doing the same thing, this always made more sense to me, I like this, is you can set up a ratio where the price in year 1 divided by the price in year 2 equals the CPI in year 1 over CPI in year 2. So price in year 1 is 400, price in year 2 is X. That's what we're trying to figure out. That's our unknown. Here are the two consumer price indexes. Hopefully you know how to do the math here. You cross multiply, divide, solve for X, you're going to get the same answer. But there are two different ways of doing the same kind of problem. Really quickly, the book talks a little bit about employment and unemployment. Here's a simple diagram to show you exactly how unemployment is defined. First ask, is a person working? If they're working, obviously they're considered employed. If not, the next question is the person looking and available for work? If they are actively looking for work and available, they're considered unemployed. There are people, a lot of people, retired people and children and people like that, disabled people like that, who are not looking for work, not available, stay-at-home mothers, things like that. So those people are considered not in the labor force. So the unemployment rate really only includes these people up here. All right, I think that concludes our Chapter 5 video. So thanks. I hope these are helpful. I'll see you in Chapter 6.